Without further ado, I have the pleasure to introduce Honorable Catherine Fife, who will be the moderator of this panel. Honorable Fife is a member of the Legislative Assembly of Ontario and is currently the CWP Chairperson. She has held several leadership positions in Parliament, and she supported the CWP Canada's work on She Should Run, which is an election campaign support tool for young women across the country. Honorable Fife, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Well, we started off with a very stressful start to this session with some technical issues, but we are back on track. I want to welcome all of you, and it's such a pleasure to join this important session on work-life balance. Personally, I have not found the work-life balance as a parliamentarian, and so not only will I be moderating the session, I will be learning along the way. All of you who are in this space, this political space, understand that the pressures that we face day in and day out are constantly changing, and the expectations of us and also of ourselves are a challenge that we face also in the public sphere, and that scrutiny that we experience adds to that level of pressure. We do also know that women parliamentarians are disproportionately more likely to face challenges in balancing the demands of public office with family responsibilities, caregiving roles, personal well-being, and expectations from their respective constituencies. I had a parliamentarian tell me recently, a woman, she said, "I have to work harder to earn the trust and be valued in this role." And this is an important, I think, distinction that female parliamentarians face. And these challenges are often compounded by gender stereotypes, heightened public scrutiny, and online harassment, and the pressure to continuously demonstrate competence in traditionally male-dominated political spaces. And as more women are looking to enter politics, I think it is incumbent on us as leaders in this space to ensure that the recruitment process for women is honest and transparent, but also that the supports are there so that we have the ability to retain that talent in this political space. And so with that, I'm very excited to start the session. I have to say we have quite the panel to share with you this morning in Canada, I should say, this afternoon in many of your spaces. And so I think that Faith has outlined the fact that we are going to give the panelists an opportunity to speak and to share their experiences and their knowledge. And then we will also be moving to a Q&A. And we are, as Faith mentioned, thank you very much to all of you who were sent in some questions. So our first panelist is Kimberly McArthur. And Kimberly is the CEO and CEO at Better Politics Foundation. This is the world's leading political leadership innovation platform dedicated to renewing leadership, reimagining politics, and rebuilding trust. With a background in law, politics, and psychology, she has founded multiple social impact organizations focused on training and education across Germany, Australia, Burundi, and Haiti. Kimberly pioneered the world's first global study on politicians' mental well-being, revealing that 41% of leaders experience low mental well-being, and this research actually inspired an award-winning documentary and new support programs. She draws inspiration from political leaders who, despite immense pressure and scrutiny, remain committed to serving their communities and strengthening democracy from within. Kimberly, I will send it over to you, and welcome.
Hi, thank you so much, Catherine, and hello, everyone. It is really lovely to be here, and I think encouraging that these spaces and talks about this topic even exist. I think I've been working now in and around government politics policy with this sort of training lens coming up to 15 years now. And this wasn't always the case. So while there is still much work to be done, I think it's very encouraging that we can have these moments and talk about these things. So real credit to the CPA and to the Women's Parliamentary Caucus as well to sort of have this conversation. So I am going to have a few slides. I promise it's not death by PowerPoint, but I just do want to share some of the work that we've been doing building some of the evidence and the understanding around the experience of being a political leader globally. And then also some of the insights, the ideas, the tactics that we've collected from around the world on what can be done really to improve the experience of being a leader in the 21st century. So very quickly about me, I'm Australian originally, so I'm from the Commonwealth, but I'm based here in Germany, and I've been over here for quite a long time now. I, as my introduction indicated, have a background in psychology and also in politics, and I've been working in this space for a number of years. I'm also a mum, so that's my daughter. She was about 3 at the time, and she happened to pick up a textbook that was on my bedside table, which is The Psychology of Politicians. So I think gives you an insight into the reading that I do, but also very much aware and cognizant of this need for, and this ever, I think, continual striving for a work-life balance, even if we're not necessarily always able to achieve it in reality. And the work that we do at the Better Politics Foundation, we're a global organization. We really work to better understand how we can inspire, train, connect more people, particularly representative people, and in most contexts that means more women, to run for elected office, to go into political office, but also how we can reimagine how it's done so that we have those people going in, but that they have a sustainable workplace, work-life, potentially balance, so that they can better serve their communities and their constituencies. And by doing this, having better prepared leaders, having them work and be able to achieve their goals more sustainably, to restore trust between leaders and citizens, which I think in most of our contexts around the world is unfortunately something that's decreasing and very much on the decline. Now, we've been doing this work particularly around mental well-being in office for a number of years now. We put out a report in 2023 called Mere Mortals, where we really explored what this looked like for the first time, surprisingly, to look at what is the experience of being a leader in the modern age and what is impacting it. And I think what we found, and Catherine mentioned this statistic, is fairly worrying, but maybe in the context of how we're operating and what we're doing, not a surprise. So I want to spend just a few minutes now talking about some of the things that we found that relate to the problem, and then I'll move on much more to some sort of practical ideas and tactics that we can all be doing potentially in our different contexts to improve the situation. So the problem really, I think, is we are, particularly in the Commonwealth, based often in a lot of cases on the Westminster system, we're working with 18th century politics in 19th century institutions. I mean, the very physical spaces that often we work in and that we're in were not built with women particularly in mind. They were not built or constructed with a caregiver in mind. These spaces and these practices were built with a certain type of person. In a lot of places, that was a white male. With that person in mind, not with the diverse representative people that we now have coming into politics, thankfully. We also, unfortunately, often work with 20th century technology and mindsets and approaches, but we are all facing 21st century opportunities and challenges. And so I think just to be really clear, as we talk about work-life balance, we talk about well-being, we all have to be really honest that we are at the vanguard still of this topic, and that we are pushing against a centuries-old system in centuries-old institutions, and we are trying to make change, but it definitely isn't easy. So I think that we have to be aware that there are a lot of people still within politics, within parliaments, but also outside, that don't think this is an issue or that it should be something even that's talked about. And a lot of what we hear is, well, this is what you signed up for, so you should really accept how it is. But we absolutely don't agree with that. I would say at the Better Politics Foundation, and thankfully we have a lot of leaders around the world that we've worked with, and I've surveyed or interviewed now about 500 around the world that also don't think this is the way that it should be. And we're not talking about, some sort of airy-fairy, potentially wellness regime for leaders. We're not talking about making it easy, but we're talking about making this job safe, impactful, And we're talking about really the health of our democracies, and that's how we really frame it. This isn't just about the individual, while that's important. This is also about the fact that we know from many studies in different sectors that if you do not have a work-life balance, that impacts your well-being. It impacts your ability to think, to make decisions, to think creatively. And these are all things that we need our elected, all of you, to be doing to best serve your communities and your constituencies. And what we're also seeing, unfortunately, increasingly, is that people are determining, well, you know what, it's actually not worth it. I don't want to work 70 hours a week plus be away from my family and also be harassed online. I don't want to do that. And that's this phenomenon that's called rational non-candidacy. So we're seeing ever increasing numbers of non-contested seats around the world. And also it's becoming unsustainable, or even more unsustainable. So we're seeing increasing amounts of people, particularly women, not finishing their first mandate. So that really impacts on the health of our representative democracies. So this was the statistic that was mentioned from our study. We found 41% of the politicians we surveyed scored as having low well-being, which is, if we compare that to other first responder high stress professions, that's a higher rate of low well-being, which is, not something that I think we want for any of us ourselves, but again, in terms of the people making very critical decisions at the centers of our democracy. And in terms of the people not yet in office, we surveyed with GlobeScan a few years ago, a couple of thousand young people from around the world. And the main thing that they said was a barrier or a concern about maybe going into public office was safety and well-being. And so these are very real, very sort of critical issues, both in the supply side, if you can put it that way, of leaders, but also once leaders are in office as well, in terms of their performance and their capacities. We've just wrapped up a study that we haven't launched yet in Australia that's really trying to deep dive in this experience. And unfortunately, kind of the statistics, the data is really similar to everywhere else that we've done this around the world. 70% of the politicians said that the job had negatively affected their well-being, but also, I think very worryingly, 40% said that this lowered mental well-being had stopped them from speaking up on issues that they found important. So again, sort of going back to the fact that this is about democracy as well as the individual, the health of the democracy as well as the health of the individual. What we've seen as well is a study in Norway, actually, and I'm going to be quoting a lot of studies that we didn't do. We are far and away not the absolute experts on this topic, that this sort of daily grind, the very high work hours, being away from family, it might not cause a significant kind of break within a person. They might not quit straight away, but it does gradually deplete their resources of motivation. And so I think the kids these days are calling this kind of quiet quitting, but this is almost an unintentional quiet quitting that we're seeing. Now, from our research about what is having the most impact, negative impact, unfortunately, on the experience of being a leader, you can see here, unfortunately, violence, online hate, but the long work hours, the impacts on the family. And this was a question I think someone submitted, is also this discrepancy between the reality of the role and the public's perception of the role. So a lot of people saying to us, the public thinks that I don't really work, I get paid loads of money, and then this job is easy. And obviously the reality is very, very different. And that can actually cause its own kind of stresses because people aren't really feeling understood or seen. I think violence, online hate, at the moment, they're getting quite a lot of attention in different spaces, certainly in the media, in different countries, in Australia, definitely in Canada, here in Germany, where we are as well. The long work hours and sort of some of the more mundane, I guess, day-to-day realities of the role perhaps don't get as much attention, but are certainly as important. So I think this topic today is very important as well. So moving on from the problem, what can we do about it, and what is being done about this in order to make the parliamentary life more sustainable, to work towards a work-life balance or more of a balance if that's possible? We really break this down into three different areas. So looking at first the individual, looking at you as a person, looking at the institution in which you operate, so the parliament or the council or the Congress, also the political party which you're part of, which is another institution, and then also at the social cultural level, what's going on in the broader society. So I just want to share some ideas that we have seen and we know about and have collected around the world. These might be things that you are already doing, that you have already pushed through, and you most certainly will have additional things that you already know about or have seen or are doing. And so feel free to share those in the chat at any point, because it's very much about sharing inspiration, I think, across different contexts, so that we can pick up things that are being done potentially in other places, and not necessarily having to reinvent the wheel each time. So looking at the individual, looking at sort of you as a person and as a leader, one thing that we hear often and very, very frequently is that mentoring and coaching is really, really helpful for the individual. It's can be done, mentoring, particularly in an informal setting, but often having a formal structure within which people can access mentoring and coaching is very, very important. Obviously, this doesn't change the reality of the role, but it can change how you deal with it, your resilience, and obviously your perspective about it, that might strengthen you or might help you sustain yourself, so that you can help to push for more maybe institutional or societal change. Team building and management training is also really key. The two protective things that I keep hearing about when I work with leaders, one is physical exercise, if you can do it, incredibly helpful. The second one is a strong team around you. Having a team that can help you work on your diary, filter out meetings or events that you might not need to attend, that you trust to be able to act in your stead if you're not able to, is really, really important. But that for most of us, we come into politics or into any role without necessarily any management or team building training or knowledge. Sometimes overnight for leaders, they win the election, they take office, and they are immediately responsible for 6, 7, 8 people on a team. Obviously, in some contexts, that's much less. But a lot of the politicians we work with, for example, here in Germany, are calling for more team building and management training so they can better manage their staff. And then that's this sort of virtuous circle that the team can then help them. One person that I've worked with, she's in the US, her team actually blocks out time for her in her calendar. They color code it. And then everything else that gets booked on her calendar has to work around that. So that helps her to maintain some semblance of a work-life balance. And it's also going to the third point, which is about holding boundaries, which is obviously much easier said, I think, than done. I think we've seen this in very famous examples. Jacinda Ardern, obviously, in New Zealand, took maternity leave, and you had an acting PM there. We have other people who, in different contexts, are saying, okay, I don't do events on Saturdays because I need to go and watch my children play sport or just spend time with my friends or my family. So people sort of putting in place seemingly small things that sort of hold some of these boundaries. Looking at the institutional level, there are many examples of this, I think, already around the world. For example, in the UK, more than 10 years ago now, they changed the sitting times and the sitting calendars to make them more family friendly, to make them earlier, essentially. In certain state governments in Australia, they're changing the rules, or already have, so that critical votes are not held past a certain time, and they have to be held within essentially working hours. We're seeing leave provisions that also now exists in the UK, in the UK Commons, where there's a proxy voting scheme that can be utilised by people if they're on parental leave. This is not without its detractors. People say that this doesn't work, but it has seemed to work somewhat in the UK. Support infrastructure in Australia, they actually removed a bar in Parliament House, because alcohol tends to be quite an issue in work-life balance as well, and replaced it with a childcare centre, so that the parliamentarians, the staffers, anyone in the House could access that for their kids. It almost stopped 5 years ago, though. More than 5 years ago, though, because of a lack of funding. So you definitely need the institutional support around these things for them to work. Codes of conduct are often cited, but they need to be able to be enforceable and enforced. And then one thing that keeps coming up as well is formal onboarding. So that happens in New Zealand. It also happens in Canada. But in New Zealand, there's now a mandated 2-week onboarding process. And again, that doesn't necessarily change the current system, but it means that parliamentarians are much more aware of the system in which they operate and how they can change it and how they can improve it, which I think is very important. And then finally, onto the societal cultural level. One thing that we've seen that doesn't always work for everyone, because everyone has a different context, and this is completely understandable, is trying to be open and honest about the challenges and sort of normalizing authenticity. Again, I think a nice example from New Zealand, it's quite famous, it happened a number of years ago, where the speaker was feeding the baby of one of the MPs while they were in the House, to really, I guess, show that this was a place where you could have children, where you could do both. You could be a parent or a caregiver and still have a career inside of politics. And also speaking out on the realities. One person that I've spoken to recently was talking about the fact that that serving with authenticity or talking about their own struggles actually made them a better leader. It brought them closer to their constituents who might be dealing with similar things. And again, this doesn't necessarily make immediately for a better work-life balance, but it changes the norms that we have around politics, that politicians are either, on the one hand, lazy and not working at all, or on the other hand, that they don't need any support and training. And so I think this speaking out and this normalizing helps to shift some of those norms. And then my final point, and I'll stop there, is how do we measure all of this? And this is something that is really lacking in the space, is what is the measurement of political leadership, of the support for political leadership, and of how well different countries are doing in terms of their support for leaders. So we launched an index last year that's really trying to fill this evidence gap. We launched it with 10 countries initially, several of which are within the Commonwealth. And we draw on existing data and some of our own data as well to start to get a sense of what's working where and the impact that it's having in those contexts as well, so that we can start to point to changes over time, or where things are working, where things aren't working, and use that as a tool for parliamentarians or for parties or for activists to help push for change and improvements. So that was a quick whirlwind of some ideas and some of the evidence we've found, but I'm very happy to answer questions as well when we come to the Q&A.
So thank you so much, Kimberly. I mean, I'm fascinated by a couple of these stats because I'm living them here in Canada as well. And you know, things are not getting better as well. So that is why these support mechanisms, I think, are so important. And I want to thank you for a thorough presentation. And just to confirm, everything that you said absolutely did resonate with me. And I'm 14 years in as a parliamentarian, right? We're having some technical issues, and so we're just actually going to take a few questions and answers right now from you, if that's okay. I did want you to, one question came in, just for you to sort of talk a little bit more of this concept of quiet quitting, because this is sort of a new and somewhat ironically, quiet quitting, silent, sort of a new phenomenon for politicians, where they are sort of backing off and not putting themselves out there because they feel more and more vulnerable. And so could you just sort of unpack that a little bit for us so that we can better understand it?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a phenomenon that we're seeing, again, unfortunately, everywhere that we're looking. So it doesn't seem to be tied to a particular political system or a particular context. It does seem to be fairly universal. And that is, and it can manifest, I guess, in different ways. That is that political leaders, and this applies to men and women, and I'll kind of go into that in a second, they see, and it's a very sort of rational perception of the risk. So whether that's a risk to themselves physically or reputationally, particularly online, or to their family, that the amount of backlash and I guess the kind of variety of backlash that can now happen. It's not just that you'll go into the party room and you know, have people turn on you. It's that you then have that in the party room, in the parliament. You then have that potentially on the street or back in your constituency, and you have it online as well. Is causing people to not speak out so much about particular issues that they might really care about, but then that they know are particularly contentious or emotive. We don't necessarily see a difference in that behavior between men and women in the research that we have done, but we absolutely know that the threats, that the attacks, particularly again online, against women leaders around the world, again, are not necessarily greater, but they're of a different nature. They are much more personally threatening. There is rape threats, there are death threats, and there are threats to the family. And so in one sense, women potentially on that basis are sort of more resilient in the sense that they have more dire threats to them, but are behaving in the same way. But that then is something that really impacts on the quality of the decisions that are made, the quality of the debate that we have in chambers and in the public realm from leaders, and ultimately then in the policies and the decisions that are made. So there requires, you know, I was talking about those three levels, the individual, the institutional, and the social. It requires activity and action in all three of those levels for this to change, because we need better public debate. We need people online to learn how to be better online citizens and interact, even if they don't agree with you, in a way where you can sort of disagree agreeably. We need the institutions themselves to improve their norms and the culture and how people communicate and talk to each other. So one example in the UK that came from the Jo Cox Foundation and Compassion in Politics. And unfortunately, Jo Cox, you'll probably know this, was a UK MP who was killed. They have a civility pledge where they get politicians to sign up to being civil to each other so that the tone of communication is improved, and that sets an example. So I guess to summarize, something we're seeing everywhere that is happening quietly, but that in our studies is being reported to us. It's very hard to measure what the ultimate impact of that is, but I guess we can assume that it isn't good.
No. Just a side story. I mean, as politicians here in our communities, we are able to host events, right? And so I obviously I'm chair of the Commonwealth Women Parliamentarians. I'm a huge supporter of trying to create a safer space for women and a more supportive space. And so I did host the Jacinda Ardern documentary, Prime Minister, and you know, had a full 2 theaters of people who had come in, and at the end of it, a lady was leaving, and she said, "Do you think that was the best documentary to host? Because it was so harsh in some respects, right? Her reality and what she had to go through and how personal the attacks became. But I also think that there's an ethical responsibility so that people understand that this political arena is changing and it is different for women and it is more personal. And so I will be, we're definitely going to be unpacking some of your stats there, Kimberly, but did you want to comment on that at all?
Just to really, agree with you, but to say that in our studies, we also ask people whether it's worth it. And in our most recent Australia study, more than 80%, I think it was about 86% of the leaders said that it was worth it, even despite all of these horrible things that they were telling us, that the ability and the position and just the joy that they had from representing their communities was there and was worth it. So I think we still need to communicate that positive side and really ramp up those aspects, whilst also, as you say, being cognizant of the negatives.
Yeah, I mean, and my response to the lady was, you know, anything worth doing well is worth fighting for. And we need your voices here. So if we're not there, then those voices won't be heard. And those issues, more importantly, reproductive rights, environmental rights, these things may not be front and center as they should be. So thank you so much, Kimberly. We're going to come back to a Q&A at that point. But it is my distinct pleasure to welcome our second panelist, the Honorable Nyota Mulcair. She is a member of His Majesty's Loyal Opposition in the Legislative Assembly of Montserrat and currently serves as Deputy Speaker. She was elected in October 2024, and she is recognized for her commitment to transparency, accountability, good governance, and effective parliamentary oversight. The Honorable Mulcair brings over 27 years of experience in public service, including more than 9 years as the Director of Postal Services. And she has also been a dedicated trade union leader, serving in the Montserrat Civil Service Association for over 2 decades, including 8 years as the president, where she championed employee welfare, professional development, and constructive labor relations. As a parliamentarian, she serves on the Public Accounts Committee and the Standing Orders Committee and the committee reviewing the police regulations. And in June 2026, she was elected as an executive member of the Commonwealth Association of Public Accounts Committees, further strengthening her contribution to parliamentary accountability across the Commonwealth. So drawing on her experience in public administration, organized labor, and parliamentary leadership, the Honorable Mulcair is passionate about promoting resilient institutions, effective leadership, and healthy and sustainable careers in public and parliamentary service. And with that, I will welcome the Honorable Nyota Mulcair. Please go ahead.
Distinguished colleagues, fellow parliamentarians, good morning from the beautiful Emerald Isle of the Caribbean. Montserrat, is truly an honor to join us, various colleagues across the Commonwealth, to discuss a topic that has become increasingly important for every parliament and, of course, for every parliamentarian. When people think about public office, they often see speeches, debates, and public appearances. But what they really see are the early mornings, the late nights, the constant telephone calls, constituency emergencies, committee meetings, etc. And these pressures can certainly blur the line between our professional and personal lives and can affect our well-being, mental and physical health, our families, and ultimately the quality of our representation. So today, yes, I will share some of my experiences. One lesson I've learned long before becoming an elected member is that balance is not something that happens by accident. It must be intentional. And for my 27 years as a public servant, many involved managing staff, meeting deadlines, representing Montserrat internationally, and balancing competing priorities. At the same time, doing this, I serve as the president of a union, and those responsibilities often require evenings, weekends, and of course, difficult conversations. So when I entered Parliament, I realized that parliamentary life magnifies all of these pressures. And just like many of these positions I have held, Parliament does not, it's a job that does not stay at the office, but it follows you home. And we know we can represent people every hour of every day. And as we know, emergencies do not wait until a Monday morning or an 8 to 4. So we have to manage that balance. And balance does not mean giving equal time to everything. Balance means giving appropriate attention to what matters most at the appropriate time. So sometimes it could be Parliament that comes first, or family, or even health that comes first. But recognizing which is needed at a particular moment is part of leadership. One practical habit that has helped me tremendously is being organized. I rely heavily on my diary and the planning system. Every meeting, every committee, every family commitment and personal appointment goes into my diary, or sometimes I use my cell phone. So I don't simply schedule work, I also schedule time for my family, personal reflection, and rest. If something is important, it deserves a place in my calendar. So I find that structure creates balance. When we plan our days instead of simply reacting to them, we reduce stress, improve our effectiveness, and create space for the people and activities that keep us grounded. So how do you prioritize your physical and mental well-being while meeting the standards of parliamentary life? An important question. So for me, resilience comes from several practical habits. First, I recognize early in life that I cannot help others effectively if I neglect myself. So self-care is not selfish, I'm going to say. It's responsible leadership and it's a must. Faith also plays an important role in my life. Prayer gives me perspective. It reminds me that not every burden belongs to me alone. So I plan my time carefully. A well-managed diary is one of my most valuable tools, like I said before. Planning ahead allows me to prepare properly for Parliament and anything that I have to do. It also makes a deliberate effort to invest in my physical and mental well-being. For example, I exercise at least 4 to 5 days a week because staying physically active helps me manage stress, maintain my energy, and maintain mental focus. I also find time to garden, which allows me to slow down, reconnect with nature. Yes, and it gives me some, relaxed time. So I also believe we should never feel guilty about taking time to care for ourselves, whether it may be getting our hair done, having a manicure, pedicure, massage, or simply taking an hour to relax. We need to find that moment to self-indulge. There are investments in our well-being, and we have to do that. After that, I feel refreshed and renewed and better equipped to serve constituents and my family. So that is very, very, very important. So there's some days that I do say that I can't do everything. And it's most important that we do that. Sometimes we want to play the hero, and we often encourage our constituents to look after their health and well-being. So as parliamentarians, we must be willing to follow the same advice ourselves. Leading by example is one of the most powerful forms of leadership. So we must do that as well. So many continue to show the caregiving responsibilities while also meeting public expectations. I find women often experience greater scrutiny, greater criticisms, etc. And that is neither healthy nor sustainable. One lesson I've learned is that women leaders must give themselves permission to say, I cannot do everything every day. And like I said, it's not weakness, it's wisdom. I have also learned important that we don't have to be the hero in our own homes. As women, many of us feel that we have to do everything ourselves, to cook, to clean, to wash, to iron, take care of the children, etc. Trying to do it all doesn't make us stronger. It simply leads to exhaustion and burnout. So I believe in the simple philosophy, many hands make light work. Running a home is a shared responsibility. When we involve our spouses and our children, we are not only reducing our own workload, we are teaching responsibility, teamwork, and life skills. In my own home, we build on each other's strength. I do most of the cooking because I enjoy it. My husband enjoys ironing, so he takes care of that. He doesn't need 2 persons to do that. My son washes the dishes and helps with the kitchen cleanup after meals. When I do laundry, someone else is hang up the clothes, someone else fold them, someone else put them away. No one person has to carry the entire load. So please, like how we want to delegate in our work life, we can also do it at home. I also believe we should start teaching our children these life skills from an early age. Teach them to wash the dishes, fold their clothes, etc. It helps. So it relieves some of the burden. It also, like I said before, lessons of responsibility. It teaches them independence and, of course, respect. And while we're doing this together, we know that it also builds the camaraderie within the family. So as women, we also wear our busyness like a badge of honor, I know that, but being overwhelmed is not a measure of success. True leadership is knowing when to ask for help, when to share responsibilities, when to recognize what we do. Yes, so we have to incorporate everyone. So if I could offer 5 pieces of advice to new parliamentarians, I would first say, know your purpose. If you know why you entered public life, the difficult days become easier to endure. Second, protect your health. You are one of your country's greatest assets. Treat yourself accordingly. Third, build a trusted support network. Family, friends, colleagues, mentors. No parliamentarian succeeds alone. We can't do it alone. So we need a good support system around us. Fourth, learn the art of saying no. Don't burn yourself out. Don't feel bad by saying no. So I'm not saying to say blunt out no. So for example, if you're asked to, for example, even this workshop, if you're going to do a presentation and it clashes with something else, you can simply say, okay, I've committed to something else already, so unfortunately I'm unable to do so. So not every invitation requires an attendance, not every meeting requires your presence. Leadership includes deciding what not to do that creates the best, so what to do that creates the best impact for the majority, right? Fifth, celebrate small victories. Politics often focuses on problems. Take time to recognize progress that sustains hope. So what should parliaments do? Individual resilience is important, but institutions also have responsibilities. Healthy parliamentary cultures do not happen automatically. I believe parliaments across the Commonwealth should consider more practicable sitting schedules wherever possible, family-friendly parliamentary practices, greater recognition of mental health, monitoring programs for new members, clear anti-harassment policies, respectful parliamentary workplaces, better orientation programs that prepare members not only for parliamentary procedures, but also for managing the personal demands of public life. These are investments not only in parliamentarians, but in democracy itself. So, as parliamentarians, we entered public life because we wanted to serve others, but lasting service requires sustainable leadership. Our effectiveness in Parliament is directly connected to our well-being outside Parliament. So we must consider that. When we take care of ourselves, we are better able to take care of our constituents. When we support one another, we strengthen our institutions. And when our parliaments become healthier workplaces, our democracies become much, much stronger. So we have to focus on keeping ourselves healthy in order to support the work that we do and our constituents and be able to be effective. So remember, exercise, it helps to keep us healthy, controls what's happening in our body, take our water, think healthy, eat on time. Many times we are so busy that we forget to eat, but I use my phone a lot. So if it's even to set your alarm on your phone to remind you to eat, to remind you to drink water, to remind you to exercise, to keep you on track with what you have to do, use your tools that are available to you. Thank you. So that's my contribution thus far.
That's so excellent. I just can't, I mean, for me, I feel like I'm a little bit of therapy this morning here in Canada because you're validating all of the experiences I think that many of us face on a day-to-day basis. So I do want to thank you very much, Honorable Mulcair, for your contribution. And it's interesting because your comments also sort of support and are the backbone of what Kimberly McArthur was talking about earlier in the evidence and in the research. I did just want to touch back and circle back to, and both you and Kimberly commented on this, is that, you know, the workplace in Parliament, it is not a normal place. This is not a normal workplace. And I know that as I've recruited women to come into Parliament, they've seen, you know, the yelling, the bullying, the tempers, the hostility, and it can be a very volatile place. I mean, I don't think any other workplace would permit people to yell at each other as part of the discourse in a question period, for instance. So both of you had sort of talked about the code of conduct and upholding that code of conduct. So Honorable Mulcair, would you like to comment on how the institution should uphold a healthy and safe working place to ensure that we actually do feel supported as women parliamentarians? What are the mechanisms that we will need to hold that level of respect to account, is my specific question.
Well, firstly, I think it starts with supporting each other in Parliament, whether we're on the government side or the opposition. So we shouldn't separate ourselves. For example, I'm in the opposition, and you have members on the government side, and who are female members as well. And we should forget party lines and just remember that there are code of conduct that govern how we should operate, and try to be supportive of each other by maintaining those. Many times we get so caught up with trying to trump each other, so to speak, or trying
We
to
try not
score
to say that
political
word.
points, trying to score political points and
Yeah.
not being sensitive to each other. And I find, and one of the things I like to say is treat others like you would want them to treat you. That is important. So if you keep this at the forefront, we would tend to stay within those lines and respect each other. But because many times persons are so busy scoring political points or busy trying to degrade each other, I find that it gets out of control. And we have to try to rein that in. And even if we're on the same party line or in government, if a colleague is bullying somebody else, we should be big enough to say, listen, you're crossing the line.
Yeah.
So that's one we can support it.
Yeah. Oh, we can't hear you anymore.
I've dropped out.
Yeah, no, you're back now. Yeah.
Okay.
It was just your last part of that sentence around maintaining the code of conduct. Yeah. We also have a code of conduct here in the Ontario Parliament. It is, of course, very difficult to enforce, right? There is an honor system in many regards. Kimberly, did you want to talk a little bit about the structural change? Because speakers traditionally have responsibility for precincts. Precincts are workplaces. The code of conduct is official policy of the precinct, and yet there is a gap in upholding that. But I'll throw it over to you, Kimberly, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think having each other's back despite your party is incredibly important, especially as women leaders. And so these sort of cross-party spaces, if they're possible, are incredibly important to help with that. What we've seen as an example in Australia that has developed over the last couple of years is there is a code of conduct there, but much like many other jurisdictions, the enforcement of it was really lacking. What it requires is money. Essentially, you need some funding in order to then put forward and develop a body within the Parliament itself that can collect the complaints, investigate the complaints, and enforce any of the repercussions or consequences that the Code of Conduct stipulates. What I think often happens is there's a Code of Conduct, but there isn't necessarily anyone to look into it or to enforce it. And so it exists, but much like laws within our broader society, you don't necessarily have someone that can enforce them. So that came about, unfortunately, because of a really awful situation that happened where there was an alleged sexual assault within the Parliament House. There was a royal commission into it, an investigation, and then from that report, a service that it's called the Parliamentary Workplace Support Service was set up. It's relatively well resourced, and it can manage that code of conduct. I don't think it's perfect, and certainly the MPs I speak with there don't think it is, but they report vastly improved the conduct and the civility within the Parliament.
Okay, thank you. Honourable Mulcair, do you want to comment on this?
So I'm looking at, I think somebody placed in the chat about the CPA standards for codes and conduct.
Yeah.
Many times I wonder how many, so it gets circulated, but how many members do pay attention to it? How many parliaments do follow it? Because many times you wonder, what are they really paying attention to? Are they just focusing on just the battering? Additionally, for what I find is in the context of Montserrat, our speakers are normally chosen from a member of government. So the government comes in and they choose a speaker. So currently we have a speaker who actually ran on the ballot of the current government. And I find that the instances where focus is just maintained on pleasing the government side as opposed to remaining neutral and unbiased. So perhaps these are some of the things we can look at in our various jurisdictions, how we go about choosing persons who serve Parliament, because it could get a lot sticky.
Yeah, no, I'm also a member of the opposition, and there's tension there for sure. Honourable Mulcair, have you considered establishing a women's caucus? Because your story of trying to meet, to control your own behavior, but also to meet other parliamentarians at a place of respect. So we did have our first women's caucus meeting here in Ontario, where we shared our personal stories about our children, about our journey into politics, and I must confess, I started to see members of the government in a different light. And I think it will change the tone of my voice when I'm asking them questions, perhaps. Have you contemplating establish a women's caucus as part of one of the CPA's, gender strengthening initiatives? Do you think it would be valuable to pursue something like that?
Yes, I do think it would be valuable, but in the Montserrat context, very difficult.
Very difficult,
So
yeah.
very difficult. So I am the only woman on the opposition side, and the other 3 women in Parliament. One is the speaker, the other 2 are on the government side. And what I find is that persons don't want to connect because they feel like it's going to betray their party, or they don't want to be seen to be colluding, so to say, with the other. And I see coming out in even committee meetings where they do think that the government should always have majority say. So, for example, in a committee meeting, you find the government side would make a suggestion, and it's a good suggestion, and us being the opposition representative on that committee may say, okay, yes, that sounds good, we don't object. But when it comes a time where we propose something, you get comments like, okay, so give me your exact wording and give me examples from other parliaments who have done this. So they're sending you now to come to do a whole research, so to speak, because it's coming from you. So it's not acceptable when it comes from the opposition, but it should be always acceptable when it comes from the government side. So these are some of the negativity that I've seen and experienced.
Yeah. So, and that's institutional weakness as well. But it also speaks to what Kimberly was also talking about, parties and how parties can, create a culture within themselves whereby they don't have to be so oppositional. Um, Kimberly, did you want to comment on that? Have you done any studies on women's caucuses? Because I know Northern Ireland has, and the Quebec Parliament here in Canada has now won for 12 years. And so it's very aspirational, I would say.
Yeah, we haven't done any studies directly on them in terms of their impact or effectiveness. I think our feedback is very much anecdotal from speaking with parliamentarians who are part of, if not a women's caucus that's more of a formal structure, they might be part of an entity or a group that's run by a civil society organization outside of the parliament. So we organize a network of organizations called the Political Leadership Entrepreneur Network. It's almost 180 organizations around the world who work with either aspiring or current leaders. They're often seen as a more, non-partisan, impartial space. And they bring leaders together. And one example here in Germany, but others that we've seen all over the world, something that we hear from those people is having this cross-partisan space. And as you said, Catherine, to connect as humans, to learn about your journey, your kids, your pets, whatever it might be, really changes the tone in the chamber. So caucuses are great. And I think you can also have a similar effect from these less formalized structures that exist outside of the parliaments.
Yeah. Even when committees travel together, we get to know each other a little bit better. And that's sort of fallen by the wayside a little bit here, but it's, it just demonstrates that when you see the other person, not just as opposition or not just as the government member, holding power, then you can meet each other halfway. But it does speak to the culture of politics, I think. Honorable Mulcair, I really appreciated your comments about family and balancing family life, and because I think that politics is a family affair. And I know that many women weigh the decision to stay in politics or enter politics based on their family and caregiving responsibilities. And in my opening comments, I referenced many of these traditional caregiving responsibilities still fall to women. Although not in my house, we're a very balanced house, and it sounds like you're the same way. One of the questions that came in was from a young parliamentarian, and she wanted to know how to balance mom guilt with the unique session timings, as it's not a 9-to-5 job, and sessions can run late and end late. Could you comment on that, about finding that balance and perhaps how your children see you? Because I think it's important for children to see their parents, their mother, as a fighter for them and for their rights. Please go ahead, Honorable Mulcair.
Right, yes, the balance is important in the household. So don't feel guilty. Get them involved in what you're doing. I never felt guilty, actually, because trade union work is similar to being a parliamentarian. And whatever I did, I got my family involved, my child involved in what I was doing. So when we were going on march, he was present. So, you teach them to fight for themselves, acknowledge that this is something that has to happen in life, and I'm a part of it, and to welcome and embrace it as well. And you also get involved in what they're doing and showing them they have your support. So you teach them to support you in what you're doing in your parliamentary work, and you support them in what they're doing, whether it's their school work, or if you get them involved in something cultural or some debating society, so you participate, so you don't feel guilty because you give up your time as well to support them. And even when I'm going to Parliament, they know my schedule. So you say, okay, next week, Tuesday, I'm going to Parliament. It may run late. Is there anything that you're going to be doing that day that may clash? So you give them your support beforehand so that they know that you still have them in your thoughts, you still accommodate what they're doing.
Mhm.
As well as, so for example, if it ran late, I know it's going to run late today. You make up tomorrow. So you either make up early or you make up tomorrow. So whatever you do, you make up. You find time to do what you need to do. You find time to sit, discuss their day. I like to take power naps as well. So, for example, if on that break for Parliament, I may get a power nap, whether it might be a 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and it helps to boost you. So perhaps although it goes late and you get home in time before they go to bed, you can still find that 10 minutes to say, okay, how was your day? Did you get your homework done? Etc. And like I say, if you get them involved in everything that you do, you don't feel guilty.
Yeah.
You just like, or even if they're left to do their homework on their own, you teach your husband or your spouse to help fit in and review that work. And when you come, you cast an additional eye over it so that they know that it's important. For example, for me, when I do the cooking, I do it early in the morning so that if anything else happen in the day, it's out of the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's about incorporation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Communication.
yeah, that's
Communicate. So
yeah.
you know what each other is doing at whatever time so that you are aware, so you can fit in, don't feel guilty at all, at all, at all.
Well, I think that your point around structure creating balance is really strong. I mean, this because children like structure. And so you're trying to, in my view, as you described it, control what you can control and then carve out that space that honors your time with family. And that family time also benefits you, which also in turn makes you a stronger parliamentarian because you don't feel guilty, right? There is an interesting question here from someone in the audience that says, how can the work-life balance discussion be framed as an all of Parliament benefit rather than a women's issue? And I think that this is because, I mean, obviously we can talk amongst ourselves and we can support each other as women parliamentarians, but ultimately we are looking for institutional structural changes that create, better and stronger democracies, which actually helps our communities in a broader sense. So the question around how this can be framed as an all of Parliament benefit rather than a women's issue. Kimberly, can I start with you on this question and then we'll go to Honorable Mulcair?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's such an important thing to raise because, we're not going to have equality and equity if only half the room agrees with or pushes for something. What we see in our interaction with leaders around the world is that men also are feeling these effects of not seeing their families, not being able to have control over their diaries, having a very, a high stress position where there are long work hours. This isn't just something that is impacting on women parliamentarians. So I think the more we can kind of share the data and share the evidence that this isn't something that is a gendered issue, but it might be that women, one, are more open to speaking about it, or two, as we've already kind of noted, in many contexts, in certain households, the caregiving responsibilities do still fall more on women, but that isn't always the case. And I guess the second aspect to this is that we know from studying the impact of stress and burnout in other sectors that having a lack of work-life balance, that having long work hours also impacts your decision making. This impacts how you're performing as a leader. So even taking out, the family aspect of it, it's about you and how you show up in your role as a politician, and that impacts absolutely everyone.
Absolutely. Honorable Mulcair, would you like to weigh in on this question? Right now you're still muted. And you may be frozen. Oh, there you go.
Right. So yes, it's really not only a women issue.
Yeah.
But what I find though, when women speak up about it, from my experience, the men like to say, oh, that's part of being a parliamentarian, so live with it. And how do we get away from that?
Mhm.
I find it's easier with men who are married to accept it better because they fully understand somewhat, but we have to make it a part of our local norms in order to combat this issue. We have to bring the men into the conversation, all the men, whether they're married or not, into the conversation. And it does come out that they too feel the same way, but they have this way of trying to be macho, so to speak, and they need to more focus on the reality of things. So we have to start the conversation everywhere, not only, and probably CPA can probably help us with that conversation, because many times when you start it locally, it comes off as this, okay, you're the problem, you're the one who's having the problem, you're the one with the issue. You're only one person, and many times you're not the only person. It's just that you're the one who is bold enough to come out and start a conversation. So if from CPA side, if they start the conversation or push it out a lot more, then that's a start and we can go from there.
Yeah. There's a couple really good questions here in the Q&A section. Like Ariane Burgess has said, I would be interested in hearing more on what the parties can do and if there's any work on that. She says, I'm considering taking a reflection on my experience of my first 5 years to my party about their duty of care. This is a really interesting question because I also share the belief that parties can play a role. Kimberly, can we start with you? And then we'll see if the Honorable Mulcair would like to weigh in on this as well. Please go ahead.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it is one of the most challenging aspects to this work to make parliaments more sustainable, is that we have political parties which are often quite opaque, private enterprises kind of at the center of our democracies, and they are all different. So there's no sort of one size fits all approach to how we can get parties invested in making change, how we can get parties, having more of sort of pastoral care or more of a duty of care for their members. And I think one thing that we see is, often parties exist in order to win elections and to push forward a certain agenda, and that's sometimes, not always, seen as the sole purpose, and that they're not required to do anything else. There's no other responsibilities to their members, for example. That is very, very difficult to change. We're starting to see more and more, though, with more women coming into positions of power within parties, more representative people coming into positions of power in parties, that is starting to shift. But thinking about what the lever is for that party to take more of a role, I think, is really key. And it can be anything from the party membership is dwindling and we need to attract more members to the party. And a way to do that is to improve the environment for those people. Or it might be that we've just lost an election, and so now is a time to really look at ourselves and self-reflect and say, okay, what can be done differently in order to come back and sort of build back better? But it's a real challenge. And one thing we're doing at the moment is researching innovations in party politics around the world and putting together kind of a playbook to say, here's, again, some examples, here's what's being done, because it's very tricky and there's not a lot out there.
You're in an uncharted territory, I think, in that regard. Honorable Mulcair, would you like to comment on the party's role around duty of care?
So personally, I think that we as politicians within parties, we need to also get into the schools because many persons aren't going to really change. And if we want change, we have to get into the schools, whether it be us personally or whether we are going to be sponsoring topics such as civics. Why do we enter politics? What's the reason to serve as a politician? How we as citizens contribute to the whole parliamentarian aspects. And I think change has to come from there. And I think that's how the party can contribute. Get into the schools, try to teach, find ways to help our children to understand why it's so important, why politics is so important, and why they should get involved, and how they should get involved, and how they can play their part in party politics, and why they should choose a particular party. So you're not really going to say, okay, choose my party because X, Y, Z, but give them the foundational tools as to what a party should be doing, how a party should contribute to the well-being of the people. And being in opposition, what I have been doing is also trying to answer some of those questions for even the constituents, because I find many of them really don't understand politics. And I find many of them are just listening to, okay, so government comes on the radio and government says X, Y, Z. And many of them take it wholeheartedly. And then they realize, okay, this is not happening, etc., and showing them the role of the opposition, that the opposition is there to help push the government along to do things in their benefit. So so it's a two-way street,
Yeah.
basically.
I do think I do think political parties have to be cognizant of the emotional labor of these jobs and their role in being, less antagonistic, I think, in some regards. But there is this philosophy, at all costs, we must win. And then you see burnout. And so then you lose the investment in that leadership potential. Really good question. There's a number of them here. We're going to run out of time, unfortunately, but I'm just going to leave this one for a quick comment from both of you, please. And this is from Ms. Zaba from South Africa. And she writes, beyond formal policy, how have successful parliaments shifted the formal culture around presenteeism, the expectation of visible long hours as a proxy for commitment, productivity, and dedication? And what political changes in leadership behavior help to redefine what commitment looks like? And this is a really interesting, we have a young parliamentarian who just had a child, and we have supported her in that time commitment by covering and supporting her work when she's there. But Honorable Mulcair, would you like to comment on this, please?
I'm sorry, could you give the question again?
Yeah, it's about presenteeism and the concept of if you are not being seen, then you're not working. And the question is, what political changes in leadership behavior helped to redefine what commitment looks like? So the role of perhaps the leader and the support that the leader can play in ensuring that, while you might not be visible all the time, that you are still working. So validating the work of another parliamentarian, even though they're not physically in that space.
Big question, very big question, but an interesting one and indeed important. So,
I mean, I'll give you a small example. Our leader references the work that other members are doing. So she brings their names and their work into the public space, honoring them, even though they're not there. So, and that sort of breaks down the stereotype that if you're not at every single event, then you're not working, right? Is that the work is still happening, but you're not necessarily there. Kimberly, would you like to comment as well?
Sure. It's such an interesting point to make about this presenteeism. I think two things. One is I go back to kind of your team and how you can work with your team to help you be productive without necessarily having to be there 24/7. And the other thing is around, and there's obviously a lot of negatives, but around social media and how you can use sharing your activity and sharing the work that you are actually doing and the impact that you're having day to day with a broader audience. So it might mean that you're not sort of sat in the chamber for 8 hours at a time, but people can still see and you have evidence and can point to the impact and the work that you're doing.
Yeah. Honorable Mulcair, do you use social media in that regard as well?
Yeah, I was just about to say that I do use social media, and I try to do like pick little topics and present on them, have something to say on them so that person see you. Um, and try to get what I do out there. So for example, for World Parliament Day last year, I did a presentation in the school and I took videos and pictures and so on. I put it up on my Facebook page and on my Instagram so a person can see exactly what you're doing outside of just being in the chamber. And I get permission from some constituencies, when I meet with them, maybe not show their face, but, probably a sidebar so that they can see a topic that you would have worked on. I have a group which has asked me to intervene on their behalf because of my knowledge being the president of the trade union, and they have not been able to progress, you know, what they're trying to achieve. So I've also asked them, if at the end of it, I can just put a little summary of what the issue was, how it was resolved, and what is expected going forward. And they have committed to that. So when I've completed that, I will put that out. So these are some of the things that the wider public do not see, but you're actually doing that work.
That's right.
And yeah, so to promote yourself, we also try to do, so for example, funerals is a big thing for Montserrat. And your constituents want to know that their parliamentary representatives show sympathy or empathize with them and their family during this time of bereavement. And we try to attend. So if, for example, on the opposition side, we have 3 members. So if all 3 cannot attend, at least one person must attend so that you show the support and they can see that you do sympathize with them. So you make sure that, so even if you personally not, at least your party attends, we show, and on the Facebook page, you might say, okay, the members of the opposition, we say our condolences to XYZ, things like that, so that
So it's very much a team support then, right?
right. Yes,
I
yes.
think
You
that
can't
that's
get everything. You can't.
no.
You won't be able to get
I
everything.
think that's a really strong point. So our time is almost over here. Kimberly, your presentation, your evidence, your research, the tracking of what we're experiencing on the ground was the audience truly appreciated. There's been a request for you to share the slides. We'll work through the CPA to make sure that participants have access to that. And I personally will be tracking your work that you're doing. Honorable Mulcair, I just think your message that balance does not happen by accident is absolutely right on. And that obviously your self-care is not selfish. And I think that that's a really profound statement for us to hear as we've joined throughout this session. And thank you very much for sharing your personal strategies. I've come away with also sharing your belief that self-care is not weakness, it's wisdom. And I think it also speaks to us being strong in our roles in our lives so that we can actually do the very important work. I just want to point the panelists to the resources that the CPA also has provided. There is a mental health document, a toolkit, if you will. The link is in the chat, the webinar chat. And we also have the gender sensitizing guidelines, which have been created to help Commonwealth parliaments to become gender sensitive institutions. I will say that this work is ongoing, and these are very much living documents because we're learning as we go along. I want to thank everyone for participating this morning, as well as the staff at the CPA, Faith and Abney, for helping pull this session together. And I think it's very valuable for us to connect in this way. I wish all of you a beautiful day, and thank you very much for participating today. And also thank you for your service. Have a great day.
Yes, you too. Thank you too. Bye, everyone.
Bye.